So you want to know how to play Baron Samedi? Well, you've come to the right place. Baron has been one of my favorite gods to play in Smite 2 since his release. I even made a montage that won a $30 prize thanks to Just About, a website that promotes content creation entirely based around Baron Samedi. I didn't play him much in Smite 1, but his kit, his abilities, and generally just his entire playstyle has shifted around ever so slightly in Smite 2, making him feel so much smoother and genuinely an outstanding character, and mini reworks like Baron Samedi really justify Smite 2's existence. I cannot stress enough how much better he feels to play than his clunky Smite 1 counterpart. Anyways, enough of me gushing over how well Hi-Rez is doing with Smite 2, and on to the tutorial. Baron 70 can be played in mid, solo, and support, but in my opinion, Tank Baron, support or solo, is significantly better than full damage Mage Baron. He has a lot of defensive scalings based on cooldown, max health, and protections, and while you're building full tank, Baron is going to honestly do roughly the same damage as a full damage Baron, so I don't see the need to play full int. Basically, as a heads up, I'm going to particularly focus on the tank aspects of his kit for this tutorial. Baron's passive is called Hysteria. Anytime he applies damage to enemies, they get a Hysteria meter that builds up. If you hit enemies with above a certain threshold of Hysteria with abilities, your abilities apply a bonus effect to you or an enemy. Additionally, his passive unlocks the ability to purchase Baron's Brew from the store for all of your allies, which is a potion that acts as a multi-pot, healing both health and mana, but when you finish drinking the bottle, you can toss it at the enemy, dealing a decent chunk of damage and applying Hysteria to the target. Most games, your entire team will buy Baron's Brew, which allows you to set up a target's Hysteria for you with it, or combo your Baron's Brew with your CC for basically an additional ability's worth of damage. Also, enemy gods at max Hysteria deal a whopping 20% reduced damage to Baron, which is an insane amount of damage mitigation on your passive. For example, Prophetic has like 15% damage mitigation at max stacks and stuff like that. Also, Baron's Brew is a consumable that refills when you go back to base, so you can keep using it over and over and over again. You don't get rid of the bottle when you throw it. Vivid Gaze is Baron's first ability. It summons skulls on either side of Baron that fire directed at your reticle in an X shape. You want to hit enemies with both parts of the beam, as it deals an additional 25% extra damage. But most importantly for support and tank Baron, if a god is above 30 Hysteria, which the max is 70, they lose strength, intelligence, and attack speed based on your protections. With the full support build, the enemy loses around 40 of each, which is an insanely, absolutely ridiculous stat swing. Combine that with 20% damage reduction from your passive, and Baron support is actually one of the very few supports who can fully 1v1 or even 2v1 enemies without the help of another player. What is also crazy about this ability is that Vivid Gaze procs on its own buff. Or it procs its own debuff, meaning that if you hit both lasers on an enemy, they immediately get 30 Hysteria and get debuff. Baron's 2 is Contagious Spirits. He calls down a circle, dealing damage to enemies in an area. If he hits an enemy, spirits fly back to all nearby allies and heals them for a flat amount plus a massive chunk of their missing health, meaning your heal is more powerful the lower HP your allies are. This can easily heal for upwards to 700 or 800 health, and comedically, your heal scales with how much cooldown rate you purchase. This makes Baron incredibly fun to play, incentivizing you to greedily purchase as many CD items as you can fit into your build, making your abilities essentially never on cooldown. He's incredibly high APM late game, and it feels like you're on God mode. Also, if you hit an enemy above 30 Hysteria, the heal you give also gives 25% movement speed and slow immunity. Baron's 3 is Wrap It Up. You throw a snake that roots an enemy after 1.75 seconds. This ability does very little damage, but the slow into root combo is basically making your CC be like 2.5 seconds long, which is incredibly premium in Smite 2. If you hit an enemy above 30 Hysteria with your 3, it makes the snake explode in a circle around the target at the end of the slow, mesmerizing all enemies within the circle for 1.5 seconds, potentially making his CC even longer and more impactful during a fight. Finally, Baron's awesome ultimate is Life of the Party. Baron jumps on a coffin and starts a vortex that sucks players towards his coffin. Enemies above 30 Hysteria pulled in very aggressively, making this basically an area of effect hook that can pull multiple enemies towards you. If an enemy hits your coffin, they take damage and are stunned, but the damage scales based on your protections. I should also add it's the first enemy that hits your coffin, not all of them, scaling up to the amount of max health damage you do to the enemies with your ultimate. This makes sure that even though you're building full tank Baron, you're always going to be a massive threat when you combine the damage from your 1, your 2, and your ultimate. Ultimately, Baron Samedi is awesome. You have to play him. He's exciting, he feels good, and above all, is fun as hell to play. Here's a build that I go pretty much every game. Heroism into Chronos Pendant to start. You're not so tanky to begin with, but the amount of damage you can do in lane is laughable. After that, the newly buffed Prophetic Cloak is insanely strong. When you get your third item, you can buy the Mana Regen book on the right of both Genji's Guard and Breastplate of Valor. One or the other, doesn't matter, just buy the book, which provides Mana Regen, which mostly solves your mana issues, before either finishing Genji's Guard or Breastplate of Valor based on the damage type that is threatening you the most. Talisman of Purification should be built either 3rd, 4th, or 5th, depending on how much your team needs in AoE beats. If you're against Ares, I would build Talisman of Purification first. You should also consider rushing Ruinous Ankh if the enemy has a lot of healing, so like 3rd, 4th, or 5th. Honestly, with your support build, builds, you have to be able to adapt to the enemy team and consider a lot of situational items, but that's just something you have to figure out by playing and researching. But nevertheless, this build will help you get through it. Max your 1 or your 2 first. I found that doesn't really matter. Then max the other one of those. Then max your 3, putting a point into your ult whenever you can. I really hope you like this slightly more in-depth guide than before, and please subscribe for more Smite 2 content.